Hello, my name is Michelle Ray, and I am delighted to be spending some time with you discussing emotional and social and conversational intelligence for leaders and how that impacts powerful leadership. So for this time together here on this video facilitation, I'm going to take a few minutes to introduce myself and talk about our upcoming October 7th live 3-hour Zoom call and what we'll be able to engage with during that time. So I'll talk a little bit about some of the prep material for that call, that time together, as well as review the information on the slides that we might have done had we been together, intersperse some of this didactic information with some of the exercises. But you'll have the opportunity at your own leisure here before we meet on October 2nd to review the information, and I will stop during each part of the PowerPoint presentation and let you know what we will be doing, primarily exercises and interaction and engagement during our time together when we meet live on Zoom. So my name is Michelle Ray, and I am the owner and founder of a consulting organization called The Center Within. I do coaching work, transformational coaching work for people who are interested in moving from where they are, which is often for my clientele in a pretty good spot, moving to great, moving to optimal, moving to really aligning their personal and professional life with their heart song. I work on a wellness wheel kind of model of intelligences. So we've got our physical intelligence, our financial intelligence, our emotional, social, conversational, spiritual, all these different ways that make us as a mind, body, spirit person whole and complete. And then from that place of optimal balance and turned on, right? All living our full potential. From that place, then we're in service, optimal service to those we serve, to the community, to the planet. So I am trained as a registered pharmacist, my first degree. And from that place, I quickly moved into leadership and worked in a variety of organizations. And the last 10 years of that part of my career, I worked managing home infusion branches who provide home IV to patients. So I managed nurses and pharmacists and intake people and billing people and delivery people and supplies and the marketing pieces and the contracts with third-party payers and our billing systems and all the regulatory issues and operational issues that went with that. And through that time, I really developed my understanding that if I were going to grow as a leader, I needed to be less attached to the tasks I had felt competent with and more engaged, more in alignment with lighting other people up, with finding their strengths, inviting them into their power, motivating them, and working to create systems that optimally supported growth and development for the greater good, for the internal and external clients and customers. From that, I launched a full-time consulting business in 2005 and have done a number of different consulting projects with organizations, again, wanting to have this wellness in the workplace, how to optimize their systems and people. I also do one-on-one coaching, executive coaching, mindfulness coaching. I have a background, as I said, in pharmacy. I also have a background in studying the mind-body connection through the health systems, through spiritual traditions, through what we know about resilience and biofeedback. And I also then, of course, have some organizational development supervisory skills. I have a master's in human development. And I teach right now at the University of Minnesota, not only for this lovely group of humans, which I'm delighted every year to get to interact with, this amazing potential that you are moving forward in your own power to make a difference in the world. I also teach health coaching for pharmacists in the College of Pharmacy, and I have taught for almost a decade and a half in the Center for Spirituality and Healing. I've been trained through the Center for Mind Body Medicine, but I teach at the U in that department in their health coaching program. So I'm also a nationally board certified health and wellness coach. So I sort of co-mingle this way of being human on all aspects of who we are into assisting, supporting, encouraging, partnering with people to really reach their full potential. So that's a little bit about me. And I want to just take a moment here to share my screen, and I want to show you a little bit about your prep material. So this has been sent out to you, and take some time, whatever you can, to take a look at these. Use them as resources for later. But there's some articles, the first two, What Makes a Leader, The Master of the Game, and we'll talk a little bit about those during this PowerPoint presentation. There's also a section from The Late Homecomer, which is a book about cultural relevance in leadership, which is lovely. It's a first-person story. There's a quick video about the emotions in the brain, because as we'll talk more about, our physical body, our intellectual body is very connected, the physical and the brain and the emotions, and also mindfulness. The mindfulness leadership is a huge movement across the world, and the value of living a mindful life, being able to self-regulate, being able to self-manage, and the impact it has on your leadership has been very well documented now for multiple decades. There's a couple other additional resources for you. And then we have some links that we're sending out on self-assessments. Again, they're designed for you to have as a way to increase your own self-awareness. They're all free. They're fun to learn more about who you are, what your inherent gifts and strengths and preferences are. Also, what is available in these maps of human development. So when you interact with people, whether they're your boss or people supporting to you, you might understand another perspective better because you have had some depth in these training and working in these systems. And then the other piece is that once we have a better understanding of the various, again, perspectives and inherent gifts and talents and strengths in ourselves, in another, we can put together a team, we can lead, honoring and really calling each person forward into their strengths, into their power. So take a look at those at your leisure. I'm going to share one more thing before we jump into our PowerPoint here. This is an exercise that you will have attached in your handout, and it's called an operational style exercise. And it is an exercise we're going to do when we're together on October 2nd. So I want you to take some time, and I'll explain more as we go through the presentation, to read through this and to choose one of these core styles as your dominant style. You will, by all counts, as a human being, have some of these qualities, all of these qualities in you. But for the sake of this exercise, deepening our own self-awareness and understanding how to connect with and even influence those who are coming from a different perspective, who see the world in a different colored glasses, a different perspective. So take a look at this, and we will have groups of 4 that will meet, and you will be answering these 3 questions. So the more pre-work you do before we meet on Friday the 2nd, the more you'll get out of our time together. So without further ado, here is our next share screen. And we'll bring up this PowerPoint presentation. So this is emotional intelligence and mindfulness for powerful leaders. Today, we're going to work to develop our emotional intelligence and self-awareness and mindfulness, as I've already touched on. We're going to really explore some of these inherent strengths and preferences and personality types. And really, it's about understanding the application of mindfulness and emotional intelligence and tendencies to enhance your effectiveness, your skills in being able to lead well. When we meet on Friday, I'm going to ask each of you to type in the chat from all the information that you've gotten. What has been the most impactful? What questions do you have? What do you want to explore further? So take some time as you jot through this presentation to maybe make a note of what you might want to share when we get together. We are changing. We as a global community, as humanity, as our interaction with planet Earth, are in a time of radical shifting and changing. So we really want to be mindful of our impact on the greater good, on the whole, to learn and understand and stand in each other's shoes and look through each other's glasses to see how we best feel the changes could benefit humanity and life on planet Earth, and also to deeply listen to someone else's perspective who most likely has that same common goal if you're in this program, right? Investing this time and energy and money to have an impact, a positive impact on the changes that are happening. So you are indeed the changes, the change leaders in our communities, in this state, in this country, in your industry. So really stepping into your full power could not be more welcome by all of the changes happening. As you know, some of our group norms that we've talked about already, we want to continue through our time together during this entire program, but also from our small encounter, to be present, right, to participate. Phones off while we're chatting, cameras on, you know, that good stuff here. We want to be mindful, to be on time, to be on keep to our schedule when we take breaks. We want to be mindful of how we name each other. We're going to have small breakouts, one-on-one talks, maybe a triads, and then these groups of 4. So be mindful, get to know each other. If we're all doing our job, we're going to experience some discomfort. And this is so amazing because it means we're growing, we're stretching our mind, we're stretching our comfort zone. And this is part of the process of growth and development and part of the process of embodying a higher capacity for leadership. We want to assume genuine engagement and good intent, and please bring yours to our time together. And we want to have a learning and curious mindset. So with that in mind, I want to jump a bit into some of the resources out there about mindful living. There's a Resonant Leadership and Bill George, True North. Authentic leaders really have this opportunity to dig deep into their own way of noticing, realizing. And there are many resources out there that talk more specifically about the documented improvements in skills of leaders. One of the successful organizations is Google, that uses this search inside yourself as their opportunity, their book on leadership development that they use in their leaders. They've gone to the United Nations to present this, and they have an incredible website called Search Inside Yourself that has many resources for you, as well as research around improving organizations using mindfulness. So the invitation here, we'll get more into mindfulness, but the invitation here is to figure out and practice and be with where our heads and our hearts intersect for a really true impact on the world. You know, so as you've read through some of these things, What Makes a Leader by Dan Goleman, you know, and you watch the YouTube on emotions in the brain. Have you checked out a little bit of the self-assessment tools? These are all leading, pointing, inviting you to find this place where your head and your heart intersect. So part of what we're going to talk about during our time together is two concepts that will be woven together. One is that we have these inherent strengths and preferences and personality types, like the ones that come through on the exercise that we will do, as well as these other types of assessments. So get to know yourself, right? And even I have used, for instance, strength finders in working with organizations where everyone in the organization takes the profile test and then sees what their top strengths are and how do they align with their work and contributions, and to learn to honor each other's strengths, even though they might not be ours. And then the second is to understand that learning behaviors around emotional, social, conversational intelligence is an ongoing invitation. It's not like, oh, I was born and my personality says that I'm not a good XYZ communicator, listener, right? Tolerant of other people's opinions. Those things are learned, or in many cases, unlearned and relearned. So emotional intelligence, we'll talk a little bit more about what that is and how mindfulness relates to it. Mindfulness is living in the present moment, the capacity to direct your attention into the present moment, to have presence on purpose. Like you have the ability, even if you're triggered, even if someone irritates you, that you have the ability to be here now, to be mindful on purpose in the present moment without judgment. There's all kinds of discernment that happens, but without attaching artificial meaning before the entire experience is explored. So to suspend judgment, suspend thinking you know better. That's where emotional intelligence starts. From there, we develop this self-awareness, this ability to notice, ooh, I'm getting angry. Ooh, it feels good in this environment, right? Ooh, my thoughts are ruminating. My emotions are doing this. So developing self-awareness, your capacity to feel what's happening in your body. I'm tight here. I'm relaxed here, right? So we develop this emotional self-awareness and we have the ability to accurately assess ourselves. We have confidence in this. This is the next step in emotional intelligence. And from there, we move around the circle. And once we can notice it and pause, right, and have some witness to it, we have the ability to begin to regulate. Wow, I am talking to this person and they have a completely different point of view than I do. And I just want to interrupt and jump in from my anger, from my resistance, from my body feeling uncomfortable, whatever you're noticing. But I have the capacity to self-manage and make a different choice. And rather than react out of conditioned response, I have the ability to respond. I have the ability to have some self-control. I have an ability to stay focused on being achievement-oriented and having a positive outlook and being adaptable and flexible. And once that skill gets embodied, gets a little more practiced, we then begin to open up into the ability, developing the capacity to be socially aware. Not only am I aware of what's coming up and I'm aware I can manage it and stay with you, but now I can genuinely release the need to be focusing on that all the time and move into empathy, move into the organizational awareness. What's best here? What's the optimal outcome? What are we shooting for? What's our strategy? And really, after developing those skills, can you begin to have influence, to really manage relationships, to roll into a coach or mentor yourself, to manage conflict well. We're going to talk more and specifically and do an exercise around authentic communication and conflict management, to be an inspirational leader, right? And again, that inspiration is to each person in their own perspective, in their own capacity. It's kind of like a seed, growing. You want everyone to open up around you into their full potential, and you cultivate teamwork. So with these intrapersonal competencies moving about and developing these interpersonal competencies, we're able to recognize through research that our intellectual capacity is only a small part of success as a leader. According to the Goldman's research, 90% of the difference between outstanding and average leaders are linked to emotional intelligence, right? Everybody can learn the technical expertise, but it's this capacity to be emotionally intelligent that has direct impact on our success. And likewise, choosing not to have emotional intelligence is a huge reason that careers get derailed. They have unsatisfying team leadership, right, during challenging times. And oh my goodness, are we seeing that now? Leaders who are not emotionally and socially intelligent are really struggling. And those that have had those skills and developed teams around those skills and invited those skills to be built on their teams are thriving, or certainly much more capable of handling the challenges being thrown at us during this time of huge reset and great change and opportunity. So if we're unable to handle interpersonal ideas and adapt to change and elicit trust, we don't go very far. And that's just a bottom line. So we've adapted that here, right, in the Humphrey Fellows. We understand that there is a dominant approach, or so it seems, right? That it's really about we're wrong and they're right, right? It's about me imposing my rightness on you and nobody listening, and the other side imposing their rightness with nobody getting anywhere, or certainly not very effectively, not very gracefully, and with a lot of effort without much systemic and impactful and sustainable change. We go into a conversation, go into leadership, deciding it's our job to change their mind. And we'll talk more about the fallacy, the ineffectiveness of that. And the method is say what we think, insist until they agree. If they don't, dismiss and move on, sometimes even demonizing and making the other bad and wrong, right? So what we're looking for developing during this time of opportunity to be with like-minded people, like-minded, like-hearted, giving their self, their resources to this time and space, even if they're radically different in their perspective. We want to come in nuance and complex differences that are important and valuable. Use this time to develop these skills, to better understand others and their views, so you can be more effective. And you want to ask questions and listen, observe, and allow for more than a single story. If you want to be a leader with a single story and a single point of view and be imposing, have at it. This is not saying you're bad and wrong. This is just saying that the research shows you will be an effective leader. So let's take a few minutes to look at Abraham Lincoln and see if you've read through the article that was offered. Here's a few words of wisdom from him all these years ago. He was a towering political genius, not because he mastered the traditional rules of the game, but because he possessed a remarkable array of emotional intelligence that are rarely found in political life, this article says. He had what we today would call first-class emotional intelligence. The decision to appoint his political enemies to his cabinet was perhaps the most obvious example of his emotional strength. Perhaps the most important of his emotional abilities was empathy, the gift of putting himself in the place of others, to experience what they were feeling, to understand their motives and desires. There are many other nuggets in this article, so take a look at it if you haven't already. Because what we know is that when we're triggered, we have less perspective, less judgment, less self-control, wisdom, more errors, more stress. When we are not triggered, or we're triggered and we have the self-management skills to keep a part of ourselves calm and centered and able to be present with what's occurring, right? Mindful, present, your attention in the present moment on purpose without judgment. We have an ability to have more perspective. Our frontal cortex is turned on. That's where all of our executive functioning is. And if we get hijacked and we get in fight and flight and protect and defend, we don't have the ability for good judgment, self-control, wisdom, and less stress. And your emotions have public consequences. So when we get together, we're going to spend some time in a small group talking about the answer to these questions. So take a few minutes in your, at this time or sometime before we meet, and ask yourself, have you had times you lost it at work, and what were the consequences? And how do leaders you know or have seen who have highly developed emotional intelligence impact their organization? So we're going to keep rolling on here and talk about developing emotional intelligence. So we've talked about the tools and assessment, practicing paying attention, because we want to develop this capacity to respond rather than react. First, you have to notice, as we've been talking about, again, mindfulness, paying attention. What's happening in my body? What are my emotions right now? What are my thoughts right now? Right? And what are the choices I'm going to make that best serve moving forward from where I am? So we'll continue around the circle from self-awareness, which is mindfulness, to managing these triggers. Here's some ideas. Think about it before maybe you continue. How do you manage your triggers in the moment? Huh? Here's one idea. Take a deep breath. Tune into your breath. A deep breath literally activates our parasympathetic nervous system, the brakes part of our autonomic nervous system, and kind of counterbalances the sympathetic, the hyperarousal. So just taking a couple deep breaths, and you can do this anywhere, and no one even needs to know you're doing it, right in the middle of a conversation. You can take some time to journal, to write, to have self-talk or talk with someone else. Use your words, articulate it, get clear. Tune into your body, as we're talking about. Sometimes I'll just take 60 seconds, close my eyes, take a deep breath, and move into noticing my 5 senses. What am I hearing, smelling, touching, tasting, seeing? And just that alone will help to reset, bring me back to what we call homeostasis. Sometimes you just need to get up and move, right? You need to shift, find some space. I'm thinking in this moment about a time I first took my first leadership job. I was working in a pharmacy as a full-time pharmacist. I'm not very far out of school. And my boss left and his boss's boss left. So we were looking at 6 months of not having anyone in charge. And there has to be a pharmacist in charge in order for the pharmacy to be open. So I drew toothpicks with my one other colleague, and I lost. I had to be the leader. And so we decided on paper, I would just do that whoever got the phone call to do whatever, we would try to limp along until somebody got there. Well, about 3 months into this, things were getting a little more disastrous. And so we had a conversation, and she was looking for another job. And I started really taking some supervisory and leadership classes and reading more articles and all that good stuff. And one day, I had 3 technicians. It was Thanksgiving coming up. And the day after Thanksgiving, they all 3 wanted the day off. And as a new leader who was mostly conflict avoidant, I got up the courage. We sat down in my little office, the three of them on the side of my desk, me here, discussing, each of them kind of arguing their point, more seniority, you had it last year kind of thing. And one of the women got very heated and she was writing, and this pen accidentally slipped out of her hand and bounced on the desk and hit me in the chest. I took a deep breath and stood up and said, I'm going for a walk around the block. And when I get back, if you haven't decided who gets the day off, we'll put 3 names in a hat, and whoever is drawn, that's it. No more, end of discussion. I don't really remember who got the day off, but I remember at that moment taking a deeper dive into my own lack of skill and commitment to myself to get a little more training. We've also been talking about getting on the balcony, witnessing yourself, right? What is happening here? Finding that neutral part of yourself that can observe without judgment. So when we can manage our triggers in the moment, there's freedom. And that is really the ability to pause between the trigger, the stimulus, and your response. That is freedom. Nobody else, no other circumstance is in charge of your behavior anymore. We can reframe things. We can know that the brain is changing, right? And I hadn't seen that perspective. And the power is in the focus. What are you focusing on? The differences or the common ground, for instance? This ability to quiet our mind is one that is unbelievably valuable. And there's a lot of research from David Roth and Jeffrey Schwartz, if you're not familiar with them. So in our tools of engagement, we want to utilize these same principles. We've already said, assume engagement and good intent. Ask good questions that convey where you are coming from, but really seek to understand another's point of view. Today in our breakout sessions and throughout your time together as Humphrey Fellows. We want to listen without disagreeing. It does not mean you agree. We're going to talk more about that. It's so liberating when you can be in conversation with someone you totally disagree with and they feel heard and you feel heard. It's magic in leadership. So we want to be aware of experiencing discomfort. We want to acknowledge that that's what's happening, especially to ourselves. And in conversation, just name it without the judgment and seek to understand. We'll have more tools for that as well. So self-awareness, as we've talked about, means having a deep understanding of your emotions, strengths, weakness, needs, and drive. The article again of What Makes a Leader by Dan Goleman, take a look through it. The truly effective leaders are also distinguished by a high degree of emotional intelligence, which includes self-awareness, self-regulation, motivation, empathy, and social skills. It's not that IQ and technical skills are irrelevant, they count, but they pale when it comes to success, to the high degree of what has come to be known as emotional intelligence. Lots of great tips and tools in that article. So again, just to touch on these skill assessments, these self-awareness assessments. Myers-Briggs, maybe many of you have taken that test. So for instance, one of the pieces there is are you an introvert or an extrovert, right? How do you get your energy? Know this for yourself. If you're an extrovert, you get energy around people. If you're an introvert, you get energy and recharge by being alone. Know it for yourself. Know it for the people you're in touch with regularly, both personally and professionally. How about your spouse or a parent or a child? What's their way in the world? And know then when they have their way of being in the world, in this example of extrovert and introvert, allow them that space. Allow them to be them. Allow them to recharge in the way that works best for them. Strength Finders is another wonderful tool I know for me, one of the life-changing things in my career through Strength Finders was one of my Strength Finders is maximizer, which means that I really enjoy going from good to great. And I would have these conversations with myself about shoulds, right? I should work more with the underprivileged. I should go more into trauma work. I should go more into, and the truth of the matter is, for me, the way I find my best use, my strength, is to find people who are already functional, moving to optimal, moving to enlightenment, moving into their full power. So I touch people who touch people who touch people. And that is what lights me up. And the permission that gave me, like I needed permission, but I did, to get clear about my own strength and to follow that path was shifted my career. The Enneagram is another amazing tool that you can find online for free. There's links in the pre-work, but to learn more about yourself. And there also, the Enneagram is interesting. There are 9 different types in this map. It's been around for thousands of years, actually. And there's from you learning more about your type, and then where do you move into when you get dysregulated, over aroused, and where do you lean when you're optimally? It's fascinating. And social and emotional competency inventories are also available right online. And I am trained in one of those social and emotional competencies. And it's really interesting because they have very specific types of emotional and social competency. There's different, again, specifics, and which are your strengths and how do you develop all of them. So we're going to take a deeper dive here into inherent styles. We're going to pick one of those models, and this is the one we're going to work with today. Merrill and Reed have this social style model, and they talk about 4 unique behavior patterns. And again, we all have all of these. But let's take a look at these different styles. So expressive styles, people show their emotions and speak assertively. They like sharing their ideas and perspectives openly with others. Others see them as creative, maybe sometimes unfocused. In an hour operational style exercise, this is the Eagles. Examples might be Ellen or Oprah, right? This very visionary type person. And the amiable people are people who show their emotions openly and prefer to ask questions rather than give orders. Relationships, feelings, and personal security are important to amiable, preferred style people. Others see them as friendly and warm. And in our exercise coming up, they are going to be the mice, the mouse. And examples might be Michelle Obama is seen this way, and Nelson Mandela is seen this way. The analytical people are people who control their emotions, but tend to ask, ask more questions rather than give orders as well. They're focused on accuracy, and they act deliberately to achieve that end. Others see them as slow-paced and detail-orientated. Bill Gates, for instance, Lucy Lee as a character on Sherlock Holmes might be another example of that. And then the driver. People control their emotions and speak assertively. They prefer to be in control of the situation and are focused on the big picture. They often are seen by others as highly efficient, but not necessarily concerned about relationships or feelings. Examples in the public eye might be Michael Jordan or Hillary Clinton. So the cool thing about this is you can see in looking at this that we need, let's say we're going to have a project at work, right? Or we're going through a strategic planning process. Or for the sake of this moment, let's say we're planning a family vacation. So in the beginning, we might want to have everybody put on their eagle expressive style and get creative and think out of the box and brainstorm, right? And people that have that tendency, that like that the most, step up, offer your suggestions, right? So after all the brainstorming, all the very divergent thinking, We might want to take that process then into the amiable style, the mouse style. And let's check with all those ideas, how it impacts people on our family vacation. Does everybody have enough money to do that? Are people physically able to do that kind of activity? Who wins? Who loses? Are there elderlies? Are there children? Right? Let's check in. Let's look at the people, relationships, feeling. After that, everybody moves into, and those who are in that preference step in and maybe take over and facilitate the discussion. Then somebody needs to check into the details. What's available? What's the airfare? What's the regulations? What's the pricing, etc. Availability. And so if you're that person, you're the accountant kind of person, right? You're the person who loves the research. Step in, do it. And then we need to move in our family vacation planning to actually making a decision and implementing something, or else, it was all a good idea, but it just fizzled. We didn't actually execute. So we need to then all put on our buffalo, our driving style, and come together and become very convergent, right? Narrow it down, pick the best things, and let's go. Let's get it done. So again, all valuable in the process. And back to our theme for today, first we have to be self-aware. Then we have to understand when we're working or talking or leading one other person in social intelligence, how are they wired? What's their preference? And then how is my group? How am my team here? What's the best way forward around our goals, our vision, our mission, right? So this is less about pigeonholing anybody and more about inviting us to step into our strengths. And one more caveat before I leave this is that successful leaders, as they move up the ladder of influence, become less and less attached to their style, their preferences, right? They don't need that to be comfortable because they develop all of them in themselves. They recognize the strengths and gifts of all of them. And they also recognize if you linger or overemphasize a particular way of being because it makes you more comfortable, you're going to find a ceiling in your leadership that will not maybe be your preference. You'll be seen as rigid, right? Imposing. So pay attention to the use of this in your own development of your social, emotional, and conversational intelligence. So how does culture impact this? Culture impacts it tremendously. It is one of the ways that we develop, both in our nature and in our nurture. So understanding our cultural influence and the biases that we have, often implicit biases, which we just take for granted, don't even think about. Bringing self-awareness to that. And then again, when we're in conversation with another, working with another to change the world, we understand and want to ask questions and get to deeply know their cultural perspective. Because I count here and you count here. And then again, in an organization, on a team. So in this book here, in the excerpt that you have, it was really heartwarming to see the transition as an immigrant of this powerful woman. She talks about the first year and a half. All she wanted to do, right, was be invisible. And that it was a nightmare being here in America. What she missed, the smells of home, her grandmother, the Hmong people, their culture that seemed to be being asked to be relinquished. It's a heartfelt journey that we get to take with her into understanding the impact of culture and transition. Here's another model. This is my daughter, Kendra Oposo, who's a lawyer in compliance and diversity, equity, and inclusion, and working for a large corporation right now. Used to work here at the University of Minnesota and develop this model of, yes, self-awareness counts, emotional intelligence, social awareness, social intelligence counts, but equally important in this trilogy is cultural awareness and really recognizing the content and the impact that we have, that it has, all of us, our own cultural awareness on our ability to be successful. And again, if we decide that our cultural impact is way more valuable, way more right than somebody else's cultural perspective, you are going to be very limited in your leadership advancement. So this is where we're going to take a pause and we're going to read through our operational style exercise. And I'm going to ask you here to put in the chat which of the four animals, four perspectives you're going to play with today for this exercise. So we'll do that. We'll break into groups of four, in each, four groups, I should say, everyone with their like-minded peeps. And then we're going to come back and answer these questions as a group and have a discussion about the impact of understanding this, these perspectives. We're now going to take a deeper dive into mindfulness. Mindfulness is often defined as this non-judgmental moment-to-moment awareness. One of the videos I offered was a video for Janice Marturano, and she is a local leadership, mindful leadership woman, consultant, who was the broker of the Pillsbury General Mills merger some years back, and it took a lot longer than she thought. She was completely burnt off. Took off a year to recover, and did some training at John Cabot's mindfulness-based stress reduction institute, and has now began her very own institute to train leaders in mindfulness. And she has a number of great resources on her website, which I know I've passed on already. So how does mindfulness affect leadership? Mindful leaders embody leadership presence, right? By cultivating focus, clarity, creativity, and compassion in service of others. It's a tangible quality. You know you've been in a room with somebody who radiates presence. It's powerful. And as we've talked about already, we have a neurological component to presence. So we have stimulus that comes into that limbic system, our midbrain, and goes through all the memories. So we're in a circumstance, we're in a meeting, and somebody says something that triggers us, and it feels unsafe. And it comes in, and there's this, what we call an amygdala hijack. I think there was a little video on that. And it immediately triggers our brainstem, our fight and flight, our hindbrain. And we move into a posture of protecting and defending. And it shuts down our prefrontal area. And this is such a gift if we're in a home, in a house that's on fire. You don't want to be contemplating the meaning of life and paying attention to subtle influences in body language and having your intuition turned on fully. You want to get the heck out of there. Right? So your eyes light up, you begin to sweat, the blood flow changes in your body and goes to your muscles. But on a day in and day out basis, if you're running at high stress like that, or if you get triggered and need to pounce and overreact in that moment, in that meeting, you're back to that meeting, and you have this inability to self-regulate, inability to take a deep breath, find a perspective, right? Have a conversation, take a break, whatever it's going to take to re-regulate you so your prefrontal cortex opens back up. And it's a worthy exercise to notice what triggers you And to take a moment in your deep breath to say, in this moment, am I really in danger, or is that just a habit? And you can literally rewire your brain. Kind of a neuroscience geek, and the power of this is fascinating. So if you're interested in learning more, dig deeper into this. It's a very biological process, both of becoming overreactive, oversensitive, over-aroused, as well as the learned capacity to self-regulate our nervous system and keep ourselves fully on access to our best and highest functioning self. So moving around the circle here, right? We've got self-awareness of know thyself, be mindful of your environment, self-management, and now we're going to move into social and relational management. Because highly social intelligent people focus on nourishing behaviors which make them appealing and magnetic to others, and people with low social intelligence are often described as toxic. Living a mindful life leads directly to social competence. Social competence includes self-regulation, emotional, cognitive, and behavioral flexibility. You are clear on your values, not just you again, but in an organization, on a team. And you're willing to be exposed and be vulnerable. All the research, if you haven't read it or watched it, on Brené Brown, on vulnerability, shame, and exposure, right? And through that, we lead into, through transcending that old paradigm that being vulnerable is weak, moving into the vulnerability and honesty and authenticity as being hugely strength-based. That develops social competence. So we want to be good at communicating, and that helps us to relate to others, and then we can relate culturally. And now we can manage well, and our goal in this time together is to lead well. So how do we find this common ground and build rapport? One of the best ways is developing empathy. We want to slip into each other's shoes and take time to listen. We want to really focus on the other person. Notice if there's ways that you let your attention drift and bring it back. So conversational intelligence is an entire new sort of framework to develop these skills. We really want to first seek to understand, and we understand more and more, even from a biochemical place, that trust and empathy and support are present is the only way we can develop a productive relationship. So here's how it works. We're in a conversation with one person, and always it activates changes. When you're conversing with someone, are you activating their fear network, or are you activating their trust network? Remember, the fear network back here, the hindbrain, the trust network, our prefrontal cortex. If you're activating fear, you're working towards excluding, judging, and limiting. And if you're activating trust, you're moving towards including and appreciating and expanding. Do you want to activate someone else's fight, flight, freeze, and appease and their survival instincts in your conversation? Or would you like to develop trust and integrity and empathy and foresight and strategic thinking and intuition? I vote for the trust networks. It's the only way through these vital instincts that real change and meaningful conversation happens. Listening is a huge skill. I remember one time being in a meeting where I was with people from all over the country. We were going to shift the way we were doing billing from a localized billing to a national billing. And there was a company, an outside company that had been hired, and they came in and they were presenting, and pretty soon into the meeting it became aware of those of us leaders in the field that this was not a discussion but we're going to tell you about what's coming your way meeting. So we felt a little betrayed and a little misled to start with. There was not much trust built. And as the morning went on, I got more and more irritated, and I got triggered to the point where I asked 3 different questions to the group presenting, and all of them were intended to highlight they did not know what they were talking about. They were, passively, aggressively, curt but polite. Do you know the type? Yes. So during our lunch break, my billing center manager came up to me and she said, wow, this isn't what I was expecting. I said, neither did I. She's like, you seem like you're frustrated. I talked about my frustration. She listened. She actively listened. She engaged. She built my trust network. She said to me at one point, the points that you are making, are true. However, they don't seem to be very kind in their delivery, and we're not getting where we need to be by triggering them. So is there a way for you to be engaged where you can be honest and kind, leading to more productivity? It stung what she had to say, but it was true. And her and I had a trusting relationship, trusting enough to be vulnerable and authentic and honest. I took a deep breath, let that settle in, and during the afternoon did continue to contribute in honesty, in kindness, and it was much more productive contribution. And in the end, a month or so later, the company did the doggone right thing and fired that company, that consulting company, and we had an internal process that improves things without radically taking a step backwards. One of my favorite quotes about listening is being listened to is so closely related to being loved that most people do not know the difference. It's by a man named David Augsburger. So we're going to move into specific ways of doing conflict, of authentic listening, and we're going to have another exercise here. So we're going to talk about components of authentic listening and components of authentic speaking. So when we actively listen, like my billing center manager, Marnie, I'm saying, oof, I'm very frustrated. This is really irritating me. And she says, oh, so what I'm hearing you say is, this isn't what you expected. No, la, 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 la. Yeah, tell me more about that. La, 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 la. Wow, I can really appreciate how frustrating that is for you. I'm noticing that you're speaking in this way. How do you think that's contributing to moving this forward? Questions like that, right? Deep, powerful, active listening questions. In the end, she said, here's the summary of what I understand your perspective is, and I get where you're coming from. It totally makes sense. And then it was her turn to talk, right? So here's a card. I hope you were emailed the PDF of this, or we'll leave this up on the board during our time together. There's a second presentation, a really short one for our Zoom call that has a few of these principles reviewed and then time for our activities. So this will be a part of that as well. I talk about this so often in my coaching practice that I have made these cards and I hand them out regularly to clients. The second aspect is the authentic speaking part. This is what I experienced. This was the impact on me, and this is what I want. So in my example with Marnie, her response to me after she first listened, right? She first sought to understand. Now she wanted to be understood. She said something like, Michelle, when you ask questions that provoke shame and embarrassment, I feel like we're taking a step backward. It makes me feel uncomfortable. It makes me feel embarrassed. And what I want is for you to re-engage in it this afternoon with all of your expertise in a way that moves us forward instead of creates barriers. Right? So that's a way for her to engage. And then if I'm any good at my process, I can say to her, wow, Marnie, what I'm hearing you say is that my responses made you uncomfortable. Tell me more about that. And she can elaborate, and I can listen. I can ask several questions, I can summarize, and I can validate her perspective. Yep, Marnie, I get where you're coming from, and I will deeply consider your invitation. So what I want you to do now, this is the information on my cards I use, is to take some time to think of 2 examples in your work life or your personal life where you want to practice this conflict resolution style of authentic listening and both in authentic speaking. So think of 2 examples of conversations that you would like to have with, again, someone you work with or someone in your personal life that really irritate you, that's kind of a gnawing at you, that you know that if you had this conversation, it would clear the air and open a possibility to improving the relationship, to building trust, and even moving the issue towards a resolution that's in a higher system, a higher process, a higher meaning, more impactful, more resonant with something that's useful. So we're going to have conversations here one-on-one to be able to, first we'll take turns, but you will deliver your issue and the other person will be whoever you ask them to be, you know. And so we're going to start with speaking. So it might be someone you're having an issue with at work, for instance. And the issue is that they dominate conversations every time you have a meeting and they interrupt. So you decide it's time to have a conversation with your peer. And you say to that person, Peter, when we're in a meeting and you interrupt people and dominate the conversation, it makes me feel anxious and frustrated, and it has an impact on me where I shut down, I don't contribute, and the group doesn't get to the optimal outcome from the discussion based on your over domination. So what I want is for you to be able to self-regulate and monitor yourself and make choices about which contributions really bring the group forward versus just spilling what you want to say because you want to be heard. And of course, Peter, your partner, is going to be very good at listening. So Peter, pretend Peter is going to say, wow, so what I'm hearing you say is when we're in meetings together and I get over excited about something and I speak up, it's probably sometimes talking over people, that is a problem for you. That shuts you down. That feels like it's ineffective in our time together. And wow, I appreciate your courage and honesty of coming to me to talk to me about this. I had no idea. Please tell me more about your experience and your ideas about how I could be more self-aware and improve. Peter offers another piece. The speaker offers quite more speaking, free-flowing conversation, using I statements, not you statements, right? Not blaming, not telling the other person they're bad and wrong, speaking from their own experience. And we move in that one-sided conversation, one speaking, one listening, to resolution, to validation, to, yep, I get where you're coming from. Again, even if you totally disagree, you can validate their perspective. Incredibly liberating. And this is like a gold nugget of leadership, to be able to tolerate, really tolerate everyone's opinion, even if it's different than yours, especially as you move up the leadership impact chain or hierarchy. It's imperative for buy-in, for motivation, to move forward with everybody's voice in the room. So take some time to work with that, find your 2 issues, and write out your speaking part. And we will spend some time together practicing that. So we're going to wrap up our time together today. This is a little about me. And if you're interested in a deeper dive in some of these concepts, Feel free to look up my book, Living from the Center Within. It talks about, it's really a map around mindful living during a time of great change. I believe that we are in the shift into a new era in every perspective, politically, economically, health-wise, finance-wise, education-wise. You pick your industry, all of you, you're seeing radical changes in the world we're living in. And this book and my work in the world is to partner with people and organizations that are moving forward, creating new systems and paradigms in this new era that are more sustainable, more inclusive, and more interconnected and interdependent realized. So check that out if you're interested. We are also going to spend time in our live time together answering these questions as a group. So again, please take a few minutes before we meet to look at the resources, listen to this PowerPoint, and be able to contribute to a conversation. How will you apply being mindful and self-aware to your leadership? What are the components of social, emotional, and conversational intelligence can you use to elevate your leadership skills and influence? And how does understanding your and others' preferences and ways of being in the world, perspectives, change your ability to lead, hopefully improve your ability to lead? So take time with those questions, and obviously pause this PowerPoint at any time. The invitation here is to live from your center within. You are co-creating who we are becoming. That's the subtitle of my book. And you are personally, interpersonally, and organizationally. And our last bit of wisdom, life has changed and growth is optional. So choose wisely. And to continue the conversation, if you're interested in coaching, if you're interested in having me work with your organization, if you just want to send an email or have coffee or be in touch, this is my contact information, and I look forward to our time together in person very soon. Well, in person online, you know what I mean, live versus recorded. So I'll stop this sharing and say to you, thank you very much for your time and attention. I know this is a lot to sit through. Hopefully you've taken a little bit of a break here and there. And I look forward to connecting with all of you live very soon. Thanks for your attention today.